Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Can everybody hear me clearly? Okay. Um, so welcome and thank you all for joining us for our first Black Mental Health Forum on this great Juneteenth. We wanted to provide this opportunity, just to kind of exchange and share information as well as insight and experience about trauma in the Black community, and then more specifically, how it affects us as Black women. Um, so we wanted this discussion to, of course, address trauma, talk about some warning signs, some ways to increase the self-awareness and how maybe past or current traumas affect our interactions, our engagement in everyday life. But we also wanted to be solution focused, talking about what are some things that we can do moving forward after this conversation. And so if any of the participants have any questions or you're moved by anything we said, feel free to put it in the chat box and we'll have a designated time just to kind of address those. And as some of you may or may not know, I am Deja Jones. I'm the founder and the president of S.H.E Inc. And then we have Ms. Phoenix Adams, who's the co-founder as well as the vice president of S.H.E Inc. And then Ms. Natalie Rennie, who is our current secretary of S.H.E Inc. What we wanted to do is give our panelists time to give a brief introduction of just tell us who you are, what you do, and what's your area of specialty. So we'll go ahead and start off with Mrs. Wick.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. I'm Sherry Wick. I am the owner of Holistically Divine Counseling in Chicago, Illinois. So I'm so thankful to be here, to be with you all in the community and to learn and to share. Background is I have a bachelor's degree from Eastern Illinois University and a master's in clinical psychology from Benedictine Illinois University. And I work with women of color, specifically Black women, mothers, the college age range and up. Love the field, have always been inspired by listening to stories and narratives and really supporting our community and other communities to make sure they thrive.
Nice. So then we can go to Mrs. Davenport, Dr. Davenport, excuse me.
I was like, Mrs. Not just yet. Thank you so much, Deja, for giving me that leeway. So when thinking about my experiences, I'm coming from the University of Missouri, Columbia's PhD program in slow psychology with a pediatric emphasis, newly minted from there. So now freshly have my PhD, and also I'm a proud alumna of Clark Atlanta University, where I was able to attend alongside Deja. And I am currently actually entering into 2 new roles. So I will transition my experiences that I gained here at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia over to Nationwide Children's Hospital and the Ohio State University, where I will be working in the NICU. So I will continue that early childhood neonatal care experience, perinatal mental health, in addition to being also appointed within the Child Center for Child Health Equity and Pediatric Research. I'll be their new postdoctoral research fellow, and really excited to work underneath the tutelage of someone who's just as passionate as I am about maternal mental health and about maternal wellness in Black families and Black women. So Doctors Dina Chisholm and Kelly Kelleher would be my mentors there. But excited to participate in really, tackling some major health equity work there with them and some disparities within our community. So that's really me. It sums me up.
Okay, go off, Dr. Davenport. Okay, and then we'll have Ms. Benton give her a brief introduction.
Hello, I am Nazinga Benton. I am a licensed professional counselor. I am currently in my PhD program, and if I can get chapter 4 done by the end of this week, we're getting there, right? If I can I'm trying to get 4. I'm not even worried about 5 yet, right? My specialty, I started out doing children and teens, and I actually worked for a foundation with that title, Children and Teens. And now I am in Atlanta Public Schools working with staff and adults. My passion is with families, preferably African-American families, just a family unit, right? Whatever the family unit looks like for, because most of us have or know about non-traditional family units, but the family unit and providing therapeutic support to the family unit. So I would say that probably is my specialty and my path of choice right now.
Nice. And Dr. Gill.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me on this beautiful yet overcast Saturday afternoon. I am Dr. Margie Gill, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist here in the Metro Atlanta area, but I do provide services throughout the state of Georgia. I'm a clinical supervisor for students in both master's and doctoral programs and pre-licensed professionals here in the state of Georgia. And I've been working in the nonprofit sector a very long time, very long time. It'll show my age if I say the number of years. I got my bachelor's from Georgia Gwinnett College. I got my master's from Brunel University in the same program 3 of you got your master's from in clinical counseling psychology. And I got my doctorate from the University of Georgia in counseling. And right now I work as the executive director, and I am the co-founder of Tabitha's House. And Tabitha's House provides resources, residential support services, mental health services to survivors of sex trafficking of all ages. And in that capacity, we do a lot of workshops, we do awareness trainings, a lot of preventative measures, but I also serve on the statewide task force, Work Group 7, and I'm the co-chair of Work Group 9. I always get that confused. I'm the vice chair of DeKalb County Juvenile Mental Health Court, the Journey program. That's a select group of young ladies who are at risk or have been sexually exploited in DeKalb County. I'm the vice chair of that mental health court. And that's a lot. And I didn't even get to the burnout stuff yet. I'm the co-chief diversity officer for the university. I work in the psych department. I'm a professor. I do a lot of stuff for Brunel. But what I really like most out of all of this is enhancing the cultural understanding, cultural knowledge, the empowerment piece when I work with people. It doesn't matter what capacity. More specifically, I love working with Black folks, all walks of life. That's just my calling and my passion. And when I'm not doing all of that other stuff, I have a school over in Rwanda, and we've had that school since 2010. And so what we have done, we have expanded to Tanzania, Uganda, Nicaragua, and so we're constantly trying to do what we can to pour into the lives of others. So thank you for having me today.
Yes, thank you all for being here and being a part of this conversation. And obviously we got some heavy hitters in the house. You all are all well accomplished. And, we were very specific in inviting you all. And you all have diverse backgrounds, so it makes the conversation that much more enriched. So we appreciate it. So we're going to start off with just a plain definition of trauma. Trauma can obviously be complex, but for the sake of this discussion, we'll just be defining trauma as a psychological, emotional, and physical response to a deeply stressing or disturbing event or experience. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Natalie, take it away.
Yes, so, and this is a question we're just gonna pose out to our panelists. How do you think the Black community responds to trauma? And how do we typically address it based on your experiences in your specialty field? And not sure who would like to start it off. or I'll pick. We could start it off with, let's go with Miss Wick, since that's how we started the introductions.
Okay. I would say the first is, in my experience, suppression. Really not responding to it, knowing that it's there, but it's not until, the safety in the space that is created where it actually comes up. And oftentimes, in working with my clients, it's a behavior that they engage in that is actually hurting them internally, and them trying to understand why. And it's going over and exploring what trauma is, and exploring how to move through it, and how to get support through it. So first, I would say first through suppression, but knowing that there's something going on, knowing that they're not as healthy as they desire or want to be, knowing that they're triggered often. And then Natalie, what was the second part to it?
No problem. How do we typically adjust trauma based on your specialty in your field?
Yeah, I would say once it's exposed, once it's talked about in the room, in the space that I'm in the private practice, it's a lot of, for some, it's going back, right? It's going back through that history, and pulling out the things that are still staying with them, even now, present day. And then as we're pulling up things, we are incorporating what are things that support healing internally, what are the things going on in the home, how are we looping in some self-care, what is our conversation to ourself, what does it sound like? So I would say that's something that I practice with my clients in the private practice space often.
Thank you.
Can we chime in and add and okay.
Of course.
Definitely.
So
the question is definitely posed to everyone. So once one finishes, whoever wants to chime in next.
okay, you all know my style. I'm comfortable in all spaces, and sometimes I think I might be a little bit too comfortable. But just from my experience and what I have observed, and as being a Black woman, I know the response to trauma is often people will encourage you to sweep it under the rug. They don't want you to talk about it. They don't want you to acknowledge it. They will rather protect the person who has inflicted the pain and the trauma than for you to actually come out and to talk about it. So I've seen that a lot. A lot of adult women I provide services to will tell me, when I was 5 or 6 years old, this was done to me. And they don't even acknowledge it as trauma or any type of a traumatic experience. They just know that they don't know how to engage in healthy relationships from adolescence and up, or they're not the best parent right now, but they don't consider past life experiences that they have gone through to how it contributes to where they are right now. So my response would be, sometimes trauma is not addressed, trauma is not acknowledged. And it's almost like it's taught that from generation to generation, things that you don't talk about. How do I address it? I call out the elephant in the room. And that's where that comfort level for me, when I say sometimes I'm too comfortable, I will ask the person, does this session need to involve other people? Or I might do some Gestalt therapy, like empty chair, letter writing, modeling, rehearsals, different things like that, so that they can hear, they can feel themselves in that moment of releasing something that they have wanted to say all that time, but they kept it bottled up because they were encouraged not to talk about it. But it goes back exactly to what Ms. Wick was saying about how it's up to us to create that safe space so that they feel like, okay, I can say this in here, and I got somebody to support me, to walk alongside me in this journey, because it will be a new beginning.
Beautiful. Like I feel like there's it's already kind of been put out there and so well defined in how trauma shows up in the Black community already. And I feel like when I think about the additional pieces, even like Dr. Gill was saying, and even, you know, profoundly how like Ms. Wick was putting things out there as well, of even how we address it in therapy, when thinking about the Black community, I realized that we're lucky if they're actually accessing therapy for trauma. So when thinking and when I think about how the Black community deals with trauma, I think about how we're not accessing therapy that is trauma informed often, is the case, or even when going through schools and like people aren't having trauma informed approaches in a lot of these like families and individuals lives, so they're kind of just having a lot of these raw experiences from these traumatic events without actual safeguards in the environment to kind of help them to like gently get back on course in whatever development for a child, or even just having a holistic life as a, you know, an adult. And then, you know, for my work, I work with, you know, families a lot, and thinking about parenting. And we can't really just say like, here's some behavioral strategies and everything else for Johnny when like mom is traumatized and dad is too. And, you know, there's this hierarchy within the family where we have to bring in grandparents and everybody else who's connected to this child, because there's a whole bunch of traumatic people who are sharing and spilling over into this child's life because they're literally experiencing traumatic things every day and they have a history. So within the Black community, you know, we can't not think critically about, you know, another big elephant, which is racism and other forms of discrimination intersectionally, and how that is traumatic, like literally having an everyday experience, whether it is like a little gut punch or it's a big event, like these things pile up, and that stress alone, it takes people out literally physically, mentally, and emotionally. And then why they have nothing left to parent, it's because the trauma is not being addressed. So a lot of times, if we're fortunate enough to be able to provide the services that are trauma informed to families and give them access to it in the community, we start off with just normalizing that it is not okay to like, it's okay to not be okay. And like normalizing the fact that everything that you just said, that's trauma. And I think that's the hard part, is like when working with Black families, I realize we don't get that grace in every single day of our lives. So by the time that they do come to a therapeutic encounter, they're like shocked that like someone's validating everything that they've experienced from that point beyond. So yeah, that's my little 2 cents.
It's more than 2 cents. And I just want to double tap, like, highlight, and this idea that we're sick if we're talking about that. That's why we don't talk about trauma. This notion that something's really mentally screwed up, right? That's what I hear oftentimes, and that's not the case. It is trauma, and how do we normalize it and communicate through it and process through it and work through it? Dr. Gill talked about the empty chair and writing letters. Love, 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 love. What happens when a client really processes through and sits through and allows it to come out in that safe space.
And so real quick, because I was not going to say anything because you all said everything. But I do think when I think about the Black community and trauma, I think first though, what is important to understand is they don't respond to it because they don't call it that. They don't identify trauma. And I think that, so all of these steps are great. And so one of the things that I do is help them identify that it is trauma, right? Because what we'll call Johnny, who's, you know, putting holes in the wall, oh, he's a wild child, or we may go to ADHD. We may say that we're okay with that, right? A little bit. And we don't dig deep to realize Johnny saw his mom and dad argue or fighting or, you know, physically fighting. And so Johnny has suffered a traumatic event. Trauma has become our norm in the Black community. It is a way of life, and we have not identified it as such. And I think that is that first step, is to identify that this is trauma, this is traumatic. These are things that, you know, because for us, even to all the things that were said that were passed on from generation to generation, so it becomes our normal. We're used to it. Like this, oh, this is just what happens. You know, this is what happens to Black folk, or this is what happens to young people who live in this neighborhood, or people who. So we've not even identified it as trauma. Many of us in the Black community, and so I think that's what our responsibility is, and that's one of the things that I do is own and help them understand that this is trauma. Let's define what trauma is. Let's own that this is traumatic, and then there is a way. Here are some tools. Here are some things. But I just wanted to say that because I think that is one thing that we miss sometimes is we don't even acknowledge that it is traumatic because it becomes our norm and our way of life.
I do just, oh, sorry.
No, you can go now.
I did just want to chime in on just a little bit. So I did, Dr. Gill, I'm not sure if you were aware, 2017 to 2019, I actually was a mental health case manager for the Journey program with DeKalb Juvenile Court. And during that time, I do believe like it's definitely an ongoing cycle with the trauma, because working in that program and seeing the girls and seeing their family and their parents, usually it's a lot of them with single parent household, just the mom, and seeing that environment, it's an ongoing cycle of this. The parents had the trauma, and then the kids are turning into a product of their environment because it was never addressed with the parent, with the grandparents. So now it's trickling down to the child. So it just keeps becoming an ongoing cycle of not being addressed. And so I do just agree with the taking it to where do we need to bring somebody into this session, because most of the time someone else does need to be brought in order for it to really be addressed from the beginning, from where it started from. And a lot of working at the courthouse, it was so many things I saw. And when the parents are so quick to say something, this is a bad child, and it's when you look at the full picture, it's like, I don't think they're a bad child. It's literally like they're a product of their environment, and the environment is not being changed. And it's up to that parent who did have the trauma when they were younger. It never got addressed with them. Therefore, they're not addressing it with their child and turning this child into a bad kid when there's just a lot of things that haven't been addressed that you're aware of, but because no one took care of it with you, in a sense, don't know how to take care of it with your child now. It's not necessarily that you don't want to, but some people just really don't know how. And because it was so swept under the rug so much, they're continuing to do that.
Yeah, and just to even add to that, with the kids that I work with dealing with mental health issues, I want to say 9 times out of 10, I am also providing resources for the family to get therapy as well, because I always notice that what the child is experiencing is only a fraction of what mom and dad are going through, or the other family members that may be watching them. But even just listening to you guys and kind of having my own enlightenment, I had to start my own personal therapy over the last 6 months because of, like what Nzinga mentioned, not understanding what things I went through was trauma, because those things were swept under. And so a lot of times for me, I did not notice that something was not normal until I had interactions with my husband, and we kind of, had misunderstandings about things, and it, caused me to go to therapy to understand what is that trauma and how is it affecting me and showing up in my everyday life. And so just to go into our next question with each of you, from your expertise, how does trauma affect our relationships in your opinion?
I could be very brief with this. I think the thing that is wild to me is like working with couples, working with families, is that a part really does affect the entire whole, whether they're aware of it or not. And it is generational. So it can almost be like it's almost like a domino effect where one person parented like this, and it came from a traumatic place in response, and then it's carried over, and then you stop the cycle, because it's literally a cycle, and they can get into different dynamics, and they can get into triangles where like there's 3 people in a relationship was not stable, and they're kind of vying for like one person's attention, between siblings with like a parent, or even with like 2 parents and a child, and you're wondering like, how did it come to be like this? And then when you explore like a parent's background, you're like, oh, that's how that came to be, because you had that modeled for you. You watched that growing up very closely and you normalized that. Very traumatic and dysfunctional is a word that I hate to say, but it really does come from like a place of usually like there was an event that happened and it changed the way that this family functioned in a healthy way. And I just, you know, I totally agree with what everyone said earlier, which is like when thinking about these relationships, the way that you usually help kids reattach to their parents is by doing so much solo work with these parents to be able to address their trauma and their experiences and how that's impacted their parenting in order to be able to do more positive things with their child, in order to prepare to be able to actually welcome the idea of having like this certain level of quality time, and not looking at praise as like, I'm just not about to load them up with compliments and, you know, hype up their head and build them up too much. And it's like, well, you tear them down. So can we work on building them back up? Because now they're depressed, or now they're anxious, or now they're or whatever else is like that current child's functioning at that time. So I think there's a lot of myth busting when it comes to understanding like how one person can impact a whole entire family, and how it's not always the child's behavior that is just a symptom of usually a bigger relational problem that's going on. And that's where I think trauma is usually the culprit that's disrupted the family relationships that I've seen.
I think trauma also has a long-term and potentially lifetime effect when unaddressed on intimate relationships. How you navigate those relationships, how much you tolerate in those relationships, how much you here again that sweep under the table type thing, sweep it under the rug, don't want to talk about it, so I'm just going to deal with it. I think trauma has the potential to destroy personal relationships, intimate relationships, you name it, it can wreak havoc. Even in that healing process, there still may be some turmoil. Even when I work with couples, I see traumatic experiences on one side that have not been disclosed to partners, and they wonder why they don't know how to communicate with each other. I go over love languages. How do you express love? How do you receive love? Because sometimes that reciprocity between the two, sometimes it's not healthy, because that's what that person is accustomed to. So to make it short, it can tear relationships down when not addressed, and when that intentionality is not given to, give your all in order to heal. Because some people are in relationships just to say they have a partner. That's not healthy, so but where does that come from? And I think here again, this is where that societal expectation, cultural expectations come into play. And this person is trying to live up to what society says, but society doesn't know the traumatic childhood or life experiences of the person who's trying to meet these standards.
Would anyone else like to add to that about trauma in relationships?
I can say definitely it affects relationship, because it makes it a lot of things, just like you said, when you're any type of relationship, whether it's a friendship, partnership, anything, even at work, it makes it hard for the person who had the experience to trust someone. And so they may question everything. And the person that they're dealing with, whether it's a friend or their mate or anything, they're going to begin to get frustrated, and it's just going to keep on going because it's not being addressed. So everything is going to be affected, no matter how big or how small it is going to be affected in any way. And I think having affirmations to someone helps, but if the person doesn't believe it within themselves, it's not gonna touch them. It's not gonna matter to them. And we had a live in the past where we discussed like love, and people always say love starts within and things like that. And I always say that I feel like the thought of that actually starts in the home first. And I always tell people an example with my son, for instance. I wake him up every day telling him, I say to him, good morning, handsome. That's how I greet him in the morning. So I start his day off like that. And so I think a lot of traumatic experience is not even always physical, it's also just verbal. And so you have those people, those parents who may wake up their kids, get your stupid self up or whatever. And so now they have this negative thought in their head. That's traumatic for them. And so I think a lot of things start from the home, and that relationship is going to determine a lot of people's relationship in the future, that parent and child relationship. And that affects the friendships, the relationships, the work relationships. It affects all of that in the long run.
I totally agree. Even just to add, it also affects your relationship with yourself, and how you see yourself, and how you pour into different parts of your life. So I definitely agree with everything that was said. And just to kind of follow up, so what are some of the risks for not addressing trauma? I know we kind of touched on it, but what are some specific risks of not addressing trauma?
So I think to answer that and then piggyback on what was just said, like what you just said, Deja, about knowing how to treat yourself. If we don't address and kind of name and call it, then the cycle continues. I've been lately on this thing. There's a saying, someone said, I was in a group and they were like, yeah, we have to learn to do unto others as we do unto ourselves. And if we learn that, and I was like, but we don't do ourselves right. So we are doing that. We live daily doing unto others as we do ourselves. We don't get that we do. We live that, because you can't do anything but do what you know. And so if we don't stop the trauma and start addressing it, we will continue to do unto others, because I don't love myself, so I don't love you. I don't like myself, so I don't like you. I don't know how to treat people because I don't know how to treat myself and what being treated right is. And so I haven't addressed the trauma that has been passed down because my mom or my grandmother or whomever did not love themselves. And they were living in an abusive relationship. And so they were called all kinds of names, anything but, like Natalie said, handsome and beautiful. And so then they called their child anything but handsome and beautiful. And then their child called their child anything but, right? And so that's the risk, is that we'll continue this cycle. We'll be like, the hamster on the wheel, and we'll just keep going. And as we keep going, what we are doing, we're normalizing that, right? We are normalizing being hamsters on the wheel versus exploring what we can learn about ourselves and what we can learn about others, how we can interact with others. Will stay here. So I think that those are some of the risks of not addressing trauma.
And just to continue on to that, then we have the constant stressors, which is impacting our health, right? Which is not allowing us to experience healthiness in our body. And so we have the knots in our shoulders and the stomach pains and just everything, right? That's impacting our physical health and wellness.
And I want to just, I know we have some people finishing up doctoral studies and going on for certifications and stuff like that. When I was doing my dissertation for my doctoral degree, I did a qualitative study, and I captured the lived experiences of 5 Black women who have been sexually exploited as children. And in that study, I asked them about adverse childhood experiences, the ACEs score. Well, when I got their ACEs scores based on what they have, recalled, I had this one participant who scored an 8. Now, the highest at the time was anywhere between a 9 and a 10. The study was being revamped to show that they would be able to capture those adverse childhood experiences of abuse, neglect, if there's a history of mental health issues in the family, if anybody has previous incarceration. Well, this particular participant scored, if I remember correctly, it was an 8. Well, based on the study, this goes back to what Ms. Wick was saying about those physical indicators. When she finished, exactly 1 month after she was a participant in my study, she passed away. She was only 59 years old. So there is something to that exposure to these traumatic experiences and the complexities of it and how it impacts your physical health and the lack of attention that we give to our physical, that trauma presents in that manner, and how it can have a life-threatening impact on it. This same participant, when she met with me, she told me she had a sister who had gone through the same things that she had gone through. She passed away at the age of 52. So there was like short life in this because of that immense exposure to all this trauma that she recalled. And I captured most of it in my dissertation, but that was kind of mind-blowing in that process because I'm the student, I'm writing about it. I tell my chair, so then I had to go back and include that in my dissertation process, that she passed away. And how did that impact the study? So there is more research that really needs to be done to study Black women and the amount of stress we try to carry on our shoulders and not be really attentive to our physical needs at the same time. It's mind-blowing.
Wow, I just, like I almost had like a moment to just reflect on that, like with you and realizing like how unfortunately common like that is becoming. And it is devastating, especially like being and thinking about, maternal like wellness and, even like the early childhood context that I work in like a fetal maternal center where their child has like a congenital, like, condition and anomaly that occurred where they need to have fetal surgery or they're going to be in the NICU. They have a higher risk of being in the NICU and receiving this critical care during that, birth to, whatever duration they're going to be in there. And I realized working in those contexts, especially with my Black families, is that, and really like it could be Black, it could be poor, whatever increases those ACEs, like you just noted. Unfortunately, like trauma floods, right? So like if you're experiencing for a rich white family who has no stressors, they can experience this big event and they're going to come through. Even if they have had no therapy, no coping skills, you can teach them basic coping skills and they'll just go through. Everything's going to like, they're on the other side. You do the screening with them. It's fine. Like stuff is like, oh, I'm just so blessed that we had you through this process. Thanks for holding my hand. All right, see you later. But for like my Black families in particular, especially if you add being, low SES, there's no space for this big event because there's been so many other big events in their life that there's no room for this stressor that is, whether you like it or not, we need this child to come into this world and unfortunately to have this surgery while you're pregnant or whatever else. And it's just so much on their shoulders where there's no room. And how do you alleviate stressors that are outside of this room that they have no control over, and you're providing coping, but they need this person to show up in their life and it's not happening, or they need this community to change or violence to go down and it's not happening. They don't have speaking of relationships, they don't have a support system because every interaction they look back and they realize like as they start having more of a like, I guess you can say like instead of being in survival mode, thriving mode, they're trying to shift into during this process of trying to maintain a certain state while being pregnant and expecting or being in the NICU parenting, where they realize like, oh, these are all transactional relationships. And oftentimes not them like being the one who's always on the receiving end, but then pouring out. And now when it's their turn, there's no one there to be able to support them the way that they supported, and even their partner that they may be with may not show up in the way that they're used to showing up for people. So when thinking about like the risk of not addressing trauma, like we got to give people room. People need room, because whether as just a human being, like we're going to have experiences in life that throws for a curveball suddenly, but do we have space to actually be able to cope with it, even if we have coping skills or not? So that's something that I definitely have been like sitting with more and more, is like, how can we give people space? Because this is just, that's literally, it's linked to mortality when you don't have space to just be and persevere through what should be a rare big event, not among many.
Yeah, even just extending, beyond just the Black community, from a lot of our research that we've done in the past, the research from the Journal of Women's Health reported that minority women in particular experience higher rates of trauma, but are less likely to disclose trauma history. Too often, I feel Black women struggle with the expectations and responsibilities that lead us to neglect our own health as well as our own well-being. Author Mary Denqua quoted, and it was very significant that I wanted to say that, she said, mental illness that affects white men is often characterized as a sign of genius. When a Black woman suffers from a mental disorder, we are labeled as weak, and weakness in Black women is intolerable. I think from that, even just the stigma or the stereotypes in the Black community, Black women are seen as strength. And I think we neglect the other side of that, that strength can also be a burden for us to always have that and never be able to discuss what's going on in our lives. But it can also cause us to suffer in silence. And just doing that research, it reminded us of a previous live that we did discussing the Superwoman Syndrome in the Black community, specifically Black women, of course. Superwoman Syndrome, or SWS, is defined as a set of characteristics found in a woman who performs or attempts to perform all the duties typically associated with several full-time roles, such as wage earner, mother, homemaker, and wife. So just to segue into that, for the panel, a question is, what are your thoughts on the idea of the Superwoman Syndrome being a trauma response for Black women? And I know, Nzinga, you were on that live, so if you wanted to start it off, you could.
Of course. So I remember that live, and I remember too that what came to me during that moment is that we are our Superwoman and we are also our kryptonite, because we feel the need to be and to do all things for all people. And so, but doing all things for all people goes back to something that Ms. Wicks said and that Dr. Gill even reiterated. It has physical ramifications when we are trying to be and do all for all people. Here, hence, traumatic. It is trauma. It is traumatic for us to try to be and do all. I do think that something warrants being said, as much as we do our part from the mental health perspective. I think there is a systemic problem, and without going down the rabbit hole of the systemic problem, but I think beyond us being therapists, we have to be advocates. Because the Superwoman Syndrome came out of something where our men were treated like animals and dogs. And then the trauma of that, when you go back, slavery and beyond, have now trickled into where we are now. And now we, even as women, will say, well, men no good, so I need to do it. And I need to this, and I got to be the mother and the father and the this and the that. And I have to, right? But we don't really own the systemic problem that started this, right? The jail pipeline, all these things. And so I think it's important, again, education, like I said before, is that we educate ourselves and that we become advocates as it relates to the system as well. Because I can give you all the tools and strategies, but if the system is still doing what the system is doing, those tools and strategies are for naught, right? So I think we have a greater responsibility, not to add more to our plates as, you know, women who are therapists, and now here we gonna suffer from the Superwoman, you know, not to add more, but as we can, when we can, to even in forums like this, call it out, you know, because I also believe that we are responsible for what we hear the moment it is spoken. And so that's why I speak out, because once I say it, somebody has caught on to it and can potentially help build this, because I know I can't do it by myself. I own that. I own my limitations, but I own that I have a mouthpiece. And if I use it and now I plant a seed, we can keep going. So yeah, those are my thoughts when I think about the Superwoman syndrome, and it is trauma. It goes along with this whole conversation. It is traumatic and trauma for us to try to be and do all things for all people.
And I just want to add to that the systemic and then the faith piece. So with some of my clients, and we're incorporating faith in their sessions, you know, I can do all things through Christ. And then the advocacy part, right? Sure, but do you have to do all things right now in this season of your life? Okay, let me advocate. I don't want to, you know, this is the belief. I want you to honor that belief. And can we honor that you don't have to, right? If it's not pouring into you and it's pulling from your cup because you don't have anything else left, let's not right now. Let's add to your cup.
I love that. That's something that I try to teach my trainees is, you know, people always talk about self-care, but when they really unpack what self-care is, it's not self-care, it's self-maintenance. Getting your nails done, getting your hair done, taking a shower, I hope we already do that. That's maintaining your hygiene. That's maintenance. That's not care. So I challenge my clients and family members, how are you maintaining yourself socially? How are you caring and nourishing yourself financially? How are you caring and nurturing yourself spiritually? How are you know, I want to tap into some things that's not surface, because we get caught up in that surface thing. And I think this is where that Superwoman syndrome comes into play, that I got to do this and I got to do that. And, you know, it's also known as the strong Black woman. So, and I did an article on the strong Black woman a few years ago. And I read about the 3 stereotypes that were associated with being that superwoman or the strong Black woman. And it was the mammy, the nurturer, Sapphire, the angry Black woman, and it was the Jezebel, the person who's always promiscuous. So that's how society has categorized Black women, not knowing, you're taking it back to that trauma, you know, that we go through it, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. Like you said about Ms. Benton, about the different types of oppression that we carry around on a daily basis, the microaggressions that we are subjected to when we step outside of our door on a daily basis. That all impacts us and our well-being. So when it comes to the Superwoman syndrome, I hate it. When I say I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. We have to learn how to delegate. We got to learn how to build other leaders. It's not for me to do all, because even in my introduction, I said a lot, but that doesn't mean I have to be the person present to do those things. That just means I oversee those things. So we have to learn how to operationally define exactly what our roles are, because we wear so many hats: wife, mother, the career identities, and all that other stuff that we carry on our backs. but we have to learn how to make sure our cup is full. I don't say half full. My cup needs to be full and overflowing. And I give people my overflow. I don't give them from my cup. I give them my overflow. And that's something that I live by.
I mean, there's really not much else to say after those really amazing summaries. I feel like, I guess, like when thinking about, Black mamas that I work with, I'm like, all right, like you are literally embracing this role that's reinforced by society, like as a mother and as like a wife, or a partner or whatever role they have at work or whatever, where they're just showing up for everybody else, helping everybody else feel like they have to go above and beyond for everyone else in their life. Like they have to be like just the most successful person because they want to stop the generational curse of like either poverty or whatever else. Like they're afraid of being poor or being on the edge of that, even if they're fine. Like things are stable, they're good. They're still just like super motivated to succeed to avoid that. Like almost like this fear of vulnerability where I rather just like have the appearance of strength, even though like I'm falling apart and like I need containment because I'm just spilling over all over the place. I'm having conversations with this person at work. I'm having conversations with this person about how stressed I am. But yet, like when it's time to like reel it all in, like it's hard for them because they're just suppressing all of these emotions and pushing it away, but it's spilling all over, the place. And I love that, Dr. Gill, you hit on right. The first thing that I usually tell them is like, who can you delegate some of these other responsibilities to? Because somebody's delegating a lot to you. So how do you shift this off your plate and you delegate it to someone else and just be that monitor, right? And that manager. But I think even in the home, it's like the moms who I work with, I'm like, you are an amazing mother. You show up for other people so well. Okay, now how can we mother ourselves? How can we shift that energy towards ourselves? Even if it's for 5 minutes, how can you mother yourself in the same, take that same energy and put it towards yourself? And they're usually in tears because they're like, oh my God, I haven't even thought about like anybody, let alone doing that for me, let alone myself doing that for me. And it's the game changer when you redirect how amazing they show up for other people to themselves. And that is literally how you're reminded, like, this syndrome, it's literally reinforced in society, it's reinforced in their homes, it's reinforced in their workplace. Like, how do you combat it other than by saying and giving the power back and empowering these women to say, enough is enough. I'm going to show up for me today. And that's literally like, when I think about that, I understand that from a personal experience and from professionally seeing it, like these things are just in the fabric of America, as everyone pointed out. And it's like, we have to stop this cycle. And it's literally like one person at a time. But I hope that we can do it to a greater magnitude. But it really does start with yourself and learning your favorite word, no. And yeah, so.
And I would say it definitely gets to a point where we're having to prove ourselves and wanting to prove ourselves when we really shouldn't have to. But it gets to that point. And I tell this story all the time, and I will forever tell this story because it was a matter of having to prove myself. Being in grad school, I was pregnant, and it got to the point where one of my professors wanted to write me off and say, maybe you need to take this semester off. Now I have to prove myself, okay? So now, because you think I can't do it, now I'm going to. And I made sure I went back to class a week after I had my son. I went back a week after I had him. Now I have to make sure in your class particularly, I have to get an A in this particular class, right? And then the person who's counting me out is 3 things against you already. You're white, you're a man, and you have no kids. So there's no way that you can tell me, a Black woman, that maybe you should take No, now because of that, I'm gonna do it and I'm gonna go harder. But that's the thing with us, with the being Superwoman, is that now we having to prove ourselves when we really shouldn't have to. But we have to make a point sometimes. Do we want to always have to do that? No, but sometimes we have to, right? And so even with that being said, what would you say from what your experiences have you seen? What are some indicators that you have seen that people are adopting that mentality of the Superwoman Syndrome?
I think it goes back to, there's this term called dramaturgy. The dramaturgy it's that front stage performance, and you got this side that you let people see and everything is okay. And yes, I can do it. And yes, I'll do that. And, oh, I can show you this and that. But behind that curtain, you're falling apart. You can barely keep it together. You're stressed, you're flippant, you're upset with your partner for doing nothing. You're yelling at your kids. That backstage is what people don't see. So the dramatization comes in for a lot of Black women in those instances. So how is it some of those indicators? Stress, the physical realm comes in, that physical breakdown. And I'm glad you mentioned, Ms. Wick, about how the spiritual side plays a role. You have the clients who come in and they'll say, I asked God, or I've been praying about this and nothing has happened. Or, I went to church and I've been diving into my word and whatever it is. But this is where it's okay to have Jesus and a therapist. And we don't want to acknowledge that. We don't want to acknowledge that, okay, I really need therapy. Just as Jesus or God or whatever higher source, one worships, just like he gave physicians. In the Bible, it tells you to seek counsel. It's just how we decide to interpret what we consume. And so I think it surfaces through, here again, those performances that we show people, but then behind that curtain is falling apart.
And to piggyback on that, like I actually had on a shirt earlier today that said God and therapy. And then I have a shirt that says you can have Jesus and a therapist. So I actually have something like that. But for not only, and even hearing your story, and then when the question came, how came the indicators, I think that like feeling the need to prove to people is an indicator that I've adopted the Superwoman Syndrome. Because I feel this need, and here again, we can go and say systemically how we're there, but when we feel like we have to prove versus like, who said that you just can't say, okay, this is what okay, and do what you need to do, how you need to do it. But what we'll do is like, come back to a week later. Like I just had my son, I'm going back. Girl, take your time, take your 6 weeks, because what's not gonna change and move is the school. Right? And so, because the goal is to get the degree, not to get the degree in a certain time. For example, we on 6.5 years. We got 0.5 left to finish this PhD, because I was beating up myself, and I spent more time beating up myself and not doing the work because I was beating myself up, versus saying they give you this 7-year period for a reason, because some folks just not, I was looking at other people, oh, they did it in 2, oh, they did this, oh, they did, their story is not my story. And so I think I was a prime example. That was an indication that I was suffering from and engaging in Superwoman Syndrome, because I want to prove, but the more I tried to prove, the further behind I got, because my body said, my brain said, no, we cannot. We no, time out. We're stopping right now. And so now I'm at a point where I'm like, it's my pace, my time. Now I am at the time limit, but even with that, I said, it's still my thoughts now. Call the 7 years, because I know what's mine and I know what I'm gonna get. So if I have to do 7.5 and y'all have to make special permission, y'all gonna make special permission, because what I'm gonna do is do what I need to do for me. I'm not worried about you and your timeline. And that is what we have for all things, because we put ourselves, or we allow society, systems, people, whomever, to put us on timelines and put us on, it has to be this way, cookie cutter, like you should do this the way no, I should do it the way my body, my mind, my soul, my spirit tells me that I should do it. So I think when we go against what our body, our mind, and our spirit tells us, what even science in some instances tells us, stay your tail at home, Natalie, for your 6 weeks. But when we feel the need to go against, to prove and to do, I think those are signs and indicators of the Superwoman Syndrome.
Yes, definitely. And Ms. Ben and Dr. Davenport, you all kind of started talking about how society plays a part in that for us. So can you kind of elaborate, can you elaborate on, how does society reinforce that for us and those thoughts?
I mean, I know that it was floating out there for a minute there where people are like, oh, I need to go to New Zealand because they have this type of family medical leave or whatever else and I'm like, it really is like embedded within our society, and it's historical for, I feel like, the Black community in particular, and for like Black women, where it is rooted in the fact that like slavery was a certain position for us and the roles that we had to play. And then you go to the civil rights movement, and then you go to all these different movements where like Black women were pivotal figures, and the reason why we had a lot of different advancement and no credit. So it's like this like fighting to be seen and visible. So it's like that intersectionality of like feeling like we're experiencing multiple forms of discrimination all at the same time. And it's like, how do we actually overcome this? Well, let me engage in these, or different behaviors to be able to like basically get the goals accomplished that I need to accomplish due to these responsibilities that are placed on my shoulder, that lead to, even when the responsibilities may not actually be all on you, you perceive it as such. Even when someone else is actually trying to share responsibility with you, you may even have a healthy partner, you may have a healthy support system, you may have all these other things, a healthy work environment, you may have, like, let's say those things actually are there and intact, yet we're still showing up in a certain way where it's like, we have to prove ourselves. We have to make sure that I obtain like this certain type of success this way. And I really do think it goes back to, even with, attainment, especially the way that I say modeling all the time, like model the things that were modeled for us. It is structurally where, we're not deep in a lot of these spaces. Like even for Dr. Gill, she just listed so many things. I was like, wow, like goals. But I realized like that is not like our normal in the Black community. It should be, but it's not yet. And unfortunately, especially like for me, I'm even going to like, another predominantly white institution. They have a few people that they're going to go to if they need health equity stuff done. And how do I say, no, I'm not the one who specializes in this, but I do know a person, because I need to delegate. I do need to share responsibility with my peers and my colleagues who I trust, and they may not even be in my institution. But remembering, I think community and like having a village, it helps for you to overcome society's like impacts on us. The more I realize I rooted in community, I rooted in sisterhood, the more all of a sudden the weight got less and less and less, because I realized I don't have to compete. I just have to be able to share. And when I share and I have all these people who I can trust and who I know do this and do that, and who I can tap in for this if I need this or whatever, or like, especially with this wave of whatever they had going on in 2020, where they felt like all of a sudden they needed anti-racism work done, and they want to call people and they want to reach out and overload everybody all at the same time. Well, guess what? I can't do it this week, but somebody else can. And are you paying me? And are you paying me at the appropriate price? Because I don't work for free for certain things and for certain people. So I think that's where it's really important to remember that society is going to place a burden on us, but we have to prioritize ourselves, and we have to self-advocate, and we have to hold on to sisterhood, because that's accountability with this. Superwoman Syndrome, without having a sister who's also like, sis, you've been working a lot. you've been doing too much. If you don't have a partner who's that check person or a family member, like you need to have those systems of accountability to remember that this is what I do, but this is who I am. And this is how I hold on to prioritizing my health and my wellness, and yet still being a game changer for someone else, but in enough of a space that's being left for me just to be. Because you have to be able to reset. And if you're looking and you're like, I don't have anything else left, I'm not able to like actually feel refreshed at any point in my day, that's a problem. But that's also reinforced by the workplace and everything else. But how do you combat that? It's usually community. It's by finding your people and finding your village, like all within the different fabrics of whether it's in the community, your neighbors, whether it's family, whether it's in your workplace, whether like find your people. Like the more you do things by yourself, the more there's weight on you. And the more you're reinforcing Superwoman Syndrome. But the more that you actually connect and you lean, which is the opposite of Superwoman Syndrome, like you actually are leaning and knowing someone can actually catch you, that's freeing. And once you do it once, you also start doing it more and more. You're like, ooh, I like this. So I think that's literally like how I realized like society may reinforce it, but an individual's decisions can shift it, especially when they tap into community.
And just kind of expanding on what you mentioned, Dr. Davenport, about shifting. I know for us, specifically being in the mental health field, we see a lot of the need to advocate for Black mental health and Black women's health as well. How do we start to shift to normalizing vulnerability within the Black community?
I think someone said it. One of the things I think we do is model. Dr. Davenport said it. Like we model vulnerability. We become vulnerable ourselves and show that, hey, guess what? The sky didn't fall when I became vulnerable. Because you can tell people all day long to do something, and they're used to, and especially here we go. We're talking about the Black community. We're used to people telling us what to do. But when people do it, I've seen some of the greatest shifts in people when because we all know, we've been in school, they teach you not to self-disclose. They teach you these things. But disclosure, of course, when done right. And I've seen, especially with us, like, and that goes in something else, because I just feel like the way that we're taught, for us is different. But I get it. That's another tangent, another day. But vulnerability and disclosing in the African community setting shifts. It has worked wonders for me and my clients, because I think the therapeutic just realm and space is for all of us. It is not just for me as the therapist sitting on the opposite end, because I am, as well as I am the therapist, I'm also the client in that moment and in most moments. And so I think vulnerability, being able to model that is super important to begin the shift. And when we those who are in leadership positions, because that's who, to be honest, if we just look at it, that's who matter to many of us. Like the sister girl down the street who looks like me, talks like me, and in the same position, and she might be vulnerable, I might look at her and say, girl, okay. But the preacher we're talking about, we're talking about churches, the pastor, the leader of my company, or the people who are my parents, even, because we don't see vulnerability in our parents with our children. Those who are in leadership position, when we see the vulnerability and see that, here again, that the sky didn't fall when you became vulnerable, when you shared your truth, when you owned your truth. I think if we start there, we have to start, because we are nowhere. So nowhere is when you know to do, you have to do. And then we teach others by the way we live. Then we can start seeing a shift and normalizing vulnerability in the Black community.
I would also add to that of normalizing it is allowing people to be themselves, and to an extent, sometimes depending on where it's going. I've had sessions with clients where sometimes they're in the middle of a rant or something and they try to pretty it up and not say what they want to say. And I always stop them and I say, let it out exactly how you want to let it out. Because sometimes they'll try to take back that curse word. If that's what you were feeling in this moment, as long as it's not being disrespectful to me, let it out like that. I have people writing poems and they'll try to, whatever they wrote, they'll try to block out when they get to that curse. Let it out exactly how you wrote it. So just letting people be them true selves too will allow for that vulnerability and showing them that they can do that. Because some people, when they try to pretty it up, and they're not releasing whatever it is needs to be released. And so I always try to tell my clients, do it exactly how you want to. This is your safe haven to do it and to be how you want to be, whoever that is. This is the time. And so that's a way to allow for the vulnerability, is just letting them be how they want to be. And again, to an extent, depending on, what the issue is or where it's going. But as long as it's not being disrespectful to themselves or even to you, just let it be how you want it.
I want to chime in there too and give a personal example. You heard in the introduction, I said I was the diversity, equity, and inclusion leader for the university. That's in addition to everything I was already doing at the university. When they asked me to come in and to lead these efforts, they asked me for 1 year. Well, guess what? That year is over June 30th because the new academic calendar comes up July 1st. Most would assume that would just roll over into the next academic year. No, back in April, I reminded them that was a 1 year commitment, because you're not about to lock me in to this heavy position that would be lateral and not increase my pay and let me take on all the responsibilities of the university. Not happening. So we have to know, this goes back to knowing your worth. You got to know your worth, what you bring to the table, and know that your time cannot be replaced with $1. Because with the amount of time you have to invest in whatever it is, you really have to, you have to be the navigator of your own ship. I said 1 year back then, and I'm holding them to 1 year presently. And the president has even asked me, are you sure you don't want to continue? I'm like, I'm positive. I say, is it a lateral or is there a pay increase? And with that pay increase, what about a time increase? Because I want you to compensate me not just in a paycheck, but I want the flexibility to determine how I use my own time. I don't want to be under somebody else's leadership when it comes to my time. So we don't know how to ask for those things because we were never taught how to factor in our time commitment to different tasks. So that's a lesson in itself.
Yeah, and I think like it really does kind of circle back, like how do you normalize vulnerability? How do you normalize vulnerability in the Black community? It really does go back to like modeling and like making sure that kids, like for me, when I use myself as a therapist in the room, I will praise them for just like being vulnerable enough to like ask for clarification, because that's vulnerability in itself. Oh, praise the heck out of them. Oh my God, I'm so happy that you said, you challenged me. Wow. Like, and they're like blown away, like, okay, lady. But it's like, no, that is a gift that you are already like brave enough to do that, because a lot of us aren't, and we're adults and we were socialized this way of like, you are seen and you are not heard, or like all these different things that kind of censored and closed off our ability to be vulnerable enough to ask for help, vulnerable enough to be able to say I'm not okay, just vulnerable in all these different ways. And vulnerability, especially in relationships, is a necessity and not just a luxury. Like that is something that is critical no matter what relationship you're forming. But when thinking about, even vulnerability, like Dr. Gill was saying, like even in the workplace of like, how do I prioritize myself enough to remember like, okay, I need to be okay too while I'm doing this job. I need to have longevity and protected time. I think it really does come down to what I learned this year, I think, while on residency, which is just kind of like, I demanded a certain level of transparency and vulnerability of my mentors this year, because I realized, okay, I'm about to make a big career move. Be real with me on like, did you need to have a research career initially in your early career, or did you need to have protected clinical time? Like, what was the thing that was most critical to make sure that you were okay during like a first, 5 years of this period? And like, what did you go through at this institution? Like, don't give me the like pretty version, like give me the real version, because am I gonna stay here? I'm gonna go somewhere else. And how was that place? And like just getting that, multiple like counsel, right? So like that community, being able to tap into that help for me to be able to avoid pitfalls that they endured and be able to navigate differently through wiser lens, because they were vulnerable enough to share and vulnerable enough to like really encourage me to even think about my own like, personal life of like, what is important to you? Because if this is important to you, then I would do this. And if this is important to you and, kids or whatever else, like, then I would do that. So it's just like having that counsel is important in being able to have mentors who are vulnerable. It really can change the life of, I'm, 29 years old, but feeling like, vulnerable, like in my little, transition state that I was in just 6 months ago, trying to make my next career move. And then when I look at the kids who I work with, I'm like, they're always, in this vulnerable state just by being a child. And it's like, if they can tap into mentors in the community who are like, I have a therapist, their teachers are like, I got a therapist. And they're like, oh, okay. So then they're more open to, see me. And I'm like, that's beautiful. So even though I'm seeing it vicariously, I realize that normalizing it really does come through like these encounters of like, if I see it, then I'm more willing to do it. But if I don't see it, or I see the opposite, then I'm gonna do that. Even if something in them even is like, this ain't right. Like, I just don't like that we do this as a family. I don't like that we do this as a community, but they won't shift out of it if they don't know what they can do instead. So that's really what I think about. And then policy change, of course.
So, Phoenix, did you want to say something?
Oh no, I'll save mine for the end.
Okay. So as we're just wrapping it up, I did just want to our panelists again, is just ask you all for what are your thoughts or some advice that you all would give someone who is dealing with trauma that maybe they haven't addressed it, or they are addressing it but still aren't really sure how to go about it. What would be some advice that you would give someone?
I think just to start it off, your life is so important. Just the statement of you truly genuinely matter. You truly genuinely matter. Your life is important. We need you. We need all of you. And that's how it started, and focusing there first, and then gently opening it up to what else would be beneficial. Slowly, but really focusing on how important you are and how loved you are.
And I'll say I usually I get there, but I usually start because I'm kind of an in your face, matter of fact type because I think we gloss over, right? And so I tell folks, crap happened to you, and sometimes I use the word crap, and sometimes I don't. Um, and we own it, and it's ours. And I liken it to a box. We all have our box of stuff. It's ours. It's yours. So this is yours. This happened to you. It is unfortunate. We cannot go back and do anything about it, but it happened. Now, how do we run and rule this box? Because the box is not us. It is just a part of us. So how do I work with this box? How do I own that it is here, own that it is present, and what do I do about it? Because what we've been teaching without teaching is to suppress the box, and we push it, but the box keep coming because the box is what the box is. So the box keep doing this, right? So let's just own this is your box. This is your box of stuff. And I have a saying that all stuff doesn't go or belong in the toilet, because some of it is fertilizer. And if we keep trying to push stuff down the toilet, we miss growth. So let's own that some of this stuff that happened to you created strength in you. and cause you to grow and to be. And so let's own the box. Let's just own the box, because it's the stuff that didn't go down the toilet. Let's own the box. Let's deal with it. Let's grow from the box. And that is then I go to like, and you are valued, and you, but it's like, let's own this first. And then even before I get to what you are to me, what are you to you? Because if you are all those things to me, you still, because I have my thing about praise anyways. I'm just, because I feel like when I keep giving it, you do it for that. But when you own that it is good and you feel good and you did a good job, you will repeat and want to keep getting that for you. Because we kind of keep still teaching people to do stuff for other folk. If I do this, they're going to say I did good. No. If you do it, do you feel good? Because that's what matters. Do you feel good? So that's kind of how I just own that it is our stuff. It is our trauma. It is our whatever, our makeup. This is what we have. And let's see, how do we work with this box? What can we get out? What can we determine in this box that is crap and need to go down the toilet? And what can we determine that's in this box that is a part of our makeup, part of our DNA, and can help us to grow and to flourish? Because there are people who import crap to grow things. Right? Because soil and dirt ain't enough. And I'm real nice saying crap. I just want y'all to know, people pay for it. People buy it. Right? And they spend top dollar for top crap. Right? So why can't I sell mine? Right? Why can't we make money off of ours? Why can't I own that this is valuable? That the thing that happened to me that I thought would crush me did not crush me. So now I can own that it did not crush me. Yes, it set me back. Yes, it caused me to be in front of a counselor. Yes, it may have done this. Yes, but it did not crush me. And so because I am here in this moment, in this right here. And so here's a start. So that is in a nutshell, or maybe not so much of a nutshell, how I would address someone.
I like that we always focus on the individual as clinicians, but there are times we have to step outside of that box so that we can have a broader reach. So I would look at, of course, working with that individual, working with their peers, families, in relationships, whether it's partners, working at that level, but then to expand out. Let's involve more stakeholders. Let's educate and inform more stakeholders, the schools, the administrations, the systems that we always talk about, churches. These are people who are directly involved in that community, and they are familiar with what goes on in that community. And let's take it a step further. Let's talk to the lawmakers. Let's go out, let's inform those who are creating these laws, who are contributing and perpetuating the systems that are not working. We got to get a bigger picture. Yes, we start with the person, but when it's time for us to advocate and to use our voice, let's go bigger. Let's look broader, because that's not the only person facing some of these things that we're talking about today. There is a plethora of other people going through similar experiences. Let's inform policy. Let's write policy. Let's encourage some of you mentioned, Dr. Davenport, about having a mentor, having that accountability person. Let's be accountable to the people that we directly serve by using our voice when we have a seat at that table. And Tyler Perry said it best: if we don't have one, build your own. Then you are the architect of what you want to see. Deja, when you told me you had this, I was so excited. The first thing I was like, well, you need help, because I know that, if you need to get this nonprofit done and you need to get it started, I have experience with that. Let me show you how to do A, B, C, D, and E. You had it done. I'm like, now how can I help? Because we got to start sharpening each other. Iron sharpens iron. It's not for me to keep everything I know and to just hoard it with myself. So when I have a seat at the table, just know that I advocate for those who are not at the table. And I don't care if they kick me out of the seat. I would be unscathed. I would be unbothered, because I know that I have built that community support, that you need me at your table. I really don't need your table. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to sit at your table, but I know the impact that's within me as that clinician, as that leader, and I want to pay it forward. So I just want to, challenge all of us who are here today to think bigger, and let's go outside of our offices, and let's write policy, and let's build those partnerships with the people who can get it pushed through.
I feel like there's really nothing else left to be said after everyone who is just so phenomenal on this panel already mentioned so many great things that I would say as a clinician. Prioritize like your individual therapy. Don't be afraid of family therapy, couples therapy. Like these are outlets that are for you to be able to do that, trauma focused work. And if you're feeling like this doesn't feel right, I don't really like this person, like whatever, then switch therapists. Like it's okay to be able to find your fit. It's okay to say, I want a Black therapist that makes me feel safe to be honest, to connect or whatever else. Like then if that's what you want, then go get it. And I know they're hard to find, but you can find them on different directories, like, therapy for Black girls. I think even for Black men now, there's like a directory. So there's just different, places where you can find a good fit for not only yourself, but for your family to be able to do what is like, this really important work to change and better your life. I think as, a researcher and as someone who is an advocate in like academic medical center, I think what really does come to mind is also remembering and empowering people in the community to remember that these politicians are literally you. Like some of them, when I would go and, to Senate or, to the House of Reps and advocate, I'll be like, I have to define what a disparity is. You don't know what that is. And you're assuming what it is and all the other things. And doing this work, alongside people where you realize like, I would actually rather my auntie be in your seat right now. So that in itself is a reminder that they may not be, you may not have all the education in the world. You may not have all of this, job experience you may have, but you literally can be a change agent and you can run for city council. You can run for these different offices where like it's a school board for your child. Don't be afraid to take leadership roles because you and yourself are an expert, not only on yourself, on your family, but also in the simple fact that you live in the neighborhood that you live in, or you live in the city that you live in, or the state or the country that you live in, and you're bringing a fresh lens to be able to enact change where you see it on the ground level. So don't be afraid to take those leadership roles, and know that like, you don't just have to advocate and go and speak, for policies to be changed, but you can actually be the one who's enforcing them. And I learned that in Missouri, being able to see like the change that drastically shifted and being able to have those grassroots movements in St. Louis and how that crossed over on the state level in the reps office and meeting different people who were, newly appointed, aldermen and different other places and people, in certain roles, but it mattered. It literally changed the way that things are run and the way that people are represented. So you can do it because it all is connected to preventing trauma. So it all works together for the good. But yeah, that's really it.
And I know we're wrapping up a little bit, but I did want to read some of the comments that we have had from our attendees. Our first comment says, "This has been great so far. Thank you so much, ladies. Awesome job." And then we have another comment that says, "I couldn't type any questions because someone would say something so good. I had to exit out the chat box. This was so inspiring and informative. I've never been in a space with so many Black women in mental health. Highlight of my week. Hashtag goals, hashtag representation." But thank you all. And so that kind of also went into my comment that I wanted to say, of just wanting to thank all of you for joining us today and just kind of giving your insight. because not only was it informative for the attendees and, who follows us, but it was also very informative for me, but also gave me a safe space to have my own therapy session. And I think I'm definitely blessed to have Deja and Natalie, because we definitely hold each other accountable. But I even had to check myself today, feeling like career-wise, I'm not moving as fast as I think I should or doing all that I should be doing, when I had to remind myself 3 years ago, I was crying and praying just to be done with grad school and be at this spot, and I'm here. And so, it's just realigning and understanding that, even though you may feel like you're going through a struggle, this is what we've prayed for to get to, bringing in that spirituality. And so, again, I just wanted to thank you all, because it's definitely inspiring, and, and it gives me ideas of where I want to go in my journey for mental health. So definitely did not want to let this end without saying thank you.
And very last word, I'm going to keep this short, but I did also want to say thank you for all of you joining us. Special thanks to our panelists. You all are awesome, doing awesome things. You all are very inspiring. Like Phoenix, I was inspired by this discussion in ways I didn't expect to be inspired. So I'm just grateful that, we have all connected in some way, and just know it doesn't end here. So if you see an email from either one of us, we'll need your help or whatever it is. But it's been very inspiring, and I thank you all again.
And I also just want to thank everyone for being on the panel and being here with us. And again, it is all so inspiring, and just the accomplishments that everyone has is something to look up to. And I always say, when I was in school, like elementary, middle school, when people used to come and talk about their accomplishments, I used to think like, wow, they did all of this at this age. And so now that I'm here and I'm 31 years old and I've accomplished so much, it makes me reflect like, you really can do a lot at certain ages that you think you couldn't. And so just hearing what everyone has done, what you're doing now and what you're still trying to do, very inspiring. And I'm very appreciative for everyone.
So thanks again, and you all enjoy the rest of your Juneteenth.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.